Meme indexer, what do you got?
Yeah, so when it comes to the governance tokens, what's the strategy behind it? Is it governance minimized, meaning you could only influence or budge the creator of the index to select new tokens to be added? Like how broad is the governance when it comes to having a governance token for an index?
Governance is similar to the way that it works on the yield protocol. The governance token holders can change the basket at any time and can change also some other parameters involved with like how rebalancing happens and a few other things. And actually I think can change the contracts themselves, although there are certain external limitations to that, which ultimately ends up relating to, actually we're going to talk about that I think right now. So I'll get to that in a second. So what is RSR's role in this? Well, RSR's role is different in that it's actually not staked to over-collateralize index DTFs. I'll talk about that, I think, more in a moment. But it remains the central asset in the reserve ecosystem in the way that ETH is the central asset in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so, so you can imagine meme coin communities using their meme coins to govern DTFs. The DTF meme coin could be used to govern the DTF that Meme Indexer is intending to launch, for instance. That's up to him. DeFi projects could use their existing governance tokens to govern DTFs that are related to their project. You can imagine accelerators forming to incubate DTFs in exchange for a portion of their governance token. You can imagine, you can imagine new governance tokens launching with various different mechanisms. There could be a bonding curve. You could have auctions to distribute your governance token. You could do airdrops. You could have farming rewards. You could do private investment rounds. You could have vesting schedules for your team members, etc. All of the flexibility that comes with creating and distributing a new token, it suddenly is available to a DTF creator. And so obviously, the trade-off is that any fees going to other governance tokens means a smaller share of those fees for RSR holders. But the idea is that this may result in a much larger overall pie for RSR holders. Obviously, we can't predict the future. We don't know if that's what will happen, but you can see with my analogy to Ethereum, my view on that circumstance. And so to bring this all together, the near-term goal is to become the decentralized version of BlackRock. Like I said, to be the #1 DTF platform, sort of the way that Ethereum is to smart contracts. But this outcome depends on broad market forces. We can design these incentives and then sort of put the software out in the world and see what happens. But you guys, the ecosystem participants, RSR holders especially, have the power to create DTFs and influence the success of this overall approach. So far, ABC Labs, Confusion Capital, BFF have not created DTFs, and we continue to not intend to do that. We see ourselves as the infrastructure providers, sort of setting the rules of the game and then letting the market compete and create things on top of all that. I feel like I didn't quite touch on the point that I wanted to address your question. So one quick note is that RSR will, so #1, you can still create a DTF and select RSR as the governance token. So one way that RSR will participate with index DTFs is through direct governance. If any RSR holder, for instance, creates a new DTF, they might choose RSR as the governance token. The second way is through like meta level ecosystem governance, and this is something that has been in discussion throughout the community for a while. We've talked about the idea of VRSR and how that might work. Not implemented yet, but that discussion is ongoing in the community, and that actually relates back to Meme Indexer's question of what can the governors of an R token change. the governor of an R token, of an index R token, can't just arbitrarily change the smart contracts. There are certain limitations that are imposed by a higher level body, and that higher level body will eventually be VRSR or something like it, with all RSR holders in control of that. And that is a way in which the collective body of RSR holders can, over the course of time, enforce the fact that a platform fee, for instance, can't just be removed by the governors of any particular R token. Okay, so one implication, we touched on this briefly, is that index R tokens are not over collateralized. This is pretty different from yield R tokens. And we sort of thought about, is this fine? And we think the answer is yes. We think this is the right way to go. And why is this? So there's sort of two reasons why we think this is fine. Reason number one is that most of the tokens included in an index DTF are just native tokens. It's just a token. It's not a token that's pegged to something else, like a stablecoin pegged to $1, or staked ETH, which is pegged to ETH. We're just talking about a native token, and so there's no way that it can default. There's no way that it can be dislodged from something that it's pegged to, and so you simply don't need that over collateralization layer. Now, there are some tokens that would be natural to include in a DTF that might have this pegged nature, most notably bridged assets, right? So if you have a DTF that's operating on Ethereum, but you want to include some tokens that are from Solana or maybe wrapped Bitcoin, then you do have a token that's pegged to another token. But in our conversations with potential DTF users, we heard a number of times that folks were comfortable taking bridge risk in exchange for sort of having broad exposure to different assets. So we concluded that for the case of an index DTF, over collateralization actually looks like it's not necessary. Part of the perspective here is that users here are more focused on overall portfolio gains rather than the question of whether the DTF is sort of like up only with respect to some reference asset, right? If you're talking about ETH plus, it would be kind of a disaster if ETH plus lost value relative to ETH, even if it's a small amount. Like, you want your ETH plus to only be going up in ETH terms, because the whole point is to get yield on ETH. Same thing with USD3 or EUSD. If there were to actually be a depeg and you lost value relative to that reference asset, that'd be a big problem. But if you're talking about like a somewhat degenerate meme coin index that gathers meme coins from 4 different blockchains via bridging the assets, and one of them a bridge gets hacked and you lose some value on that, it's like, well, it was a basket of meme coins anyway, right? You're hoping to get a 10x return or more or something, and so if and you're perfectly willing to stomach some volatility. So basically, that type of risk seems like it's not a particular problem. So basically, by choosing to not include over collateralization in at least this version of the index protocol, this makes it so that a much broader range of assets can be included, because without over collateralization, you don't need Oracle price feeds, you don't need collateral adapters, and those are 2 big limitations of the yield protocol, which makes sense in the case of yield, but don't make sense in this case, we believe. Okay, now, yeah, here's the part that I was doing from memory. So, what is RSR's role in governing in the ecosystem? Like I mentioned, you can still govern index tokens where RSR is selected. RSR will still play in the long term a meta level governance role, we anticipate. And the third one I didn't mention is that RSR will continue to have its exact same role in over collateralizing and governing yield R tokens. We think that makes sense, and like I said, these 2 protocols will coexist. So all of the staking opportunities and revenue that exist within the yield protocol will just continue exactly as they are. This is just an additional piece that's being launched on top of that. Okay, I've talked about this a couple times. No more need for collateral adapters. This is great because it just means that you can include any token in an index R token. And that's great for allowing people to create any index they want. I think you guys get that.